So in case this has started, I'm in Italy on holiday. As I said I would be at the last meeting at Speaker's Corner, and I wouldn't have made any comments but for the changes which have happened in Britain in the last week or so. 2 weeks actually now, isn't it? So in case this is starting now, I'm in Italy. I'm making comments on what's happening in England because of the dramatic nature of the riots, the unrest, the murder, the Tommy Robinson saga, the accusations, counter-accusations, heightened tension, you name it, is all kicking off in England. And fortunately or unfortunately, I'm not there. So all I can do is observe from afar. And I've been looking into what's been happening, looking into the Tommy Robinson stories. And here's my tuppence halfpenny as to what's been going on. So after the rally where Tommy Robinson supporters and a wider layer of indigenous, angry and discontented people gathered in Trafalgar Square for probably what was probably Tommy Robinson's most successful event, there was an escalation of the crisis, which was basically revolved around Tommy Robinson being arrested under the Terrorism Act. And there was a big protest about that because people thought, well, Tommy's been arrested on completely fake charges, and this was the state getting its own back at Tommy Robinson for having a successful event and challenging the mainstream narrative. And as part of this challenge of the mainstream narrative, Tommy Robinson has been able to draw on some of the people involved in the anti-lockdown movement and some of the independent media who participated and observed the processes that happened during the coronavirus crisis or the anti-lockdown movement. And he managed to draw them in under the auspices that he is also anti-establishment, and his anti-establishment rhetoric and campaigning is, one of the same as theirs. Now, I did see a video where Tommy Robinson said that he didn't join the anti-lockdown protests because it might smear the protests. Now, I don't find that a very strong argument, but okay, that's his suggestion. But I never saw him on an anti-lockdown protest. I tell a lie. One time I thought I saw him in Trafalgar Square standing in the corner, sort of observing, but perhaps he can confirm that himself. So now there's no harm in someone not having been on the anti-lockdown protest. People have their corners to fight, and lots of people were scared, and there were lots of issues. There are lots of issues around, and but it seems to me that a significant layer of the people who were involved in the anti-lockdown movement, quite heavily involved, have orientated towards the angle that Tommy Robinson has taken now. That effectively, I think I can summarise it reasonably well in saying that effectively the argument is that Britain, the indigenous British people, have been ousted by an invasion, primarily by Islamic cultures, and by uncontrolled migration taking place through the English Channel on small boats. And I saw someone's comment there. I won't bother to comment on them, but I'll have a look at them every now and again. But when there's something specific, I'll try and deal with it. If someone takes out something specific, if it's just attacks or slanders or something like that, I'm not going to comment on it. But if someone has got a specific question, post it a couple of times, and I'll try and respond to it. So the boats. Now, there are hundreds of people coming by boat on a regular basis, and obviously people are upset about that. They're in particular upset about people being put up in hotels and things like that, when the conditions of the indigenous working classes in Britain have certainly deteriorated dramatically over the last, particularly since 2008, when the global economic crisis severely affected Britain, and the towns and cities in Britain were hollowed out. Shops became like a few chains if they were lucky, and in some communities there are no chains left. And so what was the traditional working class, if you like, were left behind by the economic crisis, by basically the plundering by capital, by big financiers and capitalists, and by big international corporates, but also national companies. But then also a section of the middle class has accumulated an enormous amount of wealth through property speculation and stuff like that, And the ordinary working class couldn't afford to rent anywhere. Let me just get my bag. It's flying away. The ordinary working class couldn't get anywhere to live. At the same time, there's large-scale migration, and so a lot of people think, well, we're being shat on by the government. They're allowing mass migration. And this mass migration is undermining the living standards and conditions of the people. And so they equate one with the other. The migrants are coming in, taking livelihoods, or taking resources, while we've got none. And this is, there was a piece, but there's a guy called Simon Elmer, who I normally have a lot of time for, and he wrote some very good stuff about the lockdowns and so on, about the Great Reset, all that type of thing. And I saw him posting stuff saying, English girls killed by an immigrant or something of that nature. Correct me if I don't want to misquote him, so I won't say that's exactly the quote he made. But then I looked on Twitter, and I've unfortunately been sort of dragged into Twitter for a few days, and I'm not so keen on doing that, because it makes you do sort of spontaneous responses all the time, saying something, respond to this, respond to that. Your heart starts pumping. You think, say that, say that, say that. And, you can squander your old time doing nonsense like that. So you need to take a step back and think about what's actually happening. Who's behind it? Now, two people who did impress me in the last few days, when I had a look at what they were saying, and I'm not their fans, but, everything's fluid nowadays, so you can find yourself agreeing with someone who previously you didn't agree with, or opposing someone who you did agree with. And I've had that with a few people who I know reasonably well. They've been posting stuff, and I've been like, what are you talking about? And on the other side, there are people who, who I don't have anything to do with, I've never had anything to do with, and I don't agree with, and have virulently annoyed me in the past. And I suddenly found myself agreeing with them. So I'm sure some of you have had the same type of attitude over the last week or so. So one of them was David Icke and Gareth Icke. And they both, I think, correctly pinpointed the argument that this is a manipulated campaign to divide communities in Britain one against another in order to benefit those at the very top. Those at the very top. Now, this isn't just a British phenomenon. You see, I'm half German. My family in Germany, they were shifting towards supporting the AfD, so that's the Alternative for Germany. And when the Syrian refugee crisis happened, and there were millions of, I think it was nearly 2 million refugees accepted by Chancellor Merkel into Germany, and in the area my cousin lives, which is in southern Germany, in Freiburg, and nearby in Offenburg, there's a little sort of pedestrian street I went to, and there were lots of Syrian refugees that's hanging around. And then many of them had not got a lot of experience with German sort of social norms and cultures. And so, and they're in a refugee status. They probably don't have much money, but they've got accommodation and some facilities provided to them. Then they might form into gangs, or they might harass women, or they might engage in criminality. And this becomes a focus because it's on the street. There they are, these people doing this. And so there's a large layer of the German population who began to say, well, this is enough. You know, the term that's being used now, enough is enough, no more. But it becomes nefarious when you're unspecific, and this is where a significant danger came from what we saw with some of the posts by Tommy Robinson, and that was Tommy Robinson and Danny Tomo. And I know this guy Danny Tomo from Speaker's Corner. And Tommy Robinson, well, we met once at a police station when I was arrested, and he was arrested shortly afterwards. But otherwise, we've had no sort of dealings with each other. And the arguments that were put were that it was a Muslim, and that Islam and the boats, the migrants, are responsible. Now, okay, people can make mistakes. They can sort of throw out an idea. It's probably this, it's probably that, it's probably them, it's probably that. And in circumstances where kids have been murdered, of course, this is, you know, a natural thing that people sort of, you know, lash out. How can this be happening? How can such monstrosities occur? Look back. Do a search on the internet and see. Such atrocities have occurred, sadly, many times. In fact, one of my specialities, as some of you will know, is China. And it's actually become quite a regular occurrence in China for people who've become deranged to go into kindergartens and murder them with knives. Murder children, random children with knives. It's become reasonably common. And actually what they do in China is after there were sort of copycat examples of this, they began to block information exchange about this type of stuff. Now, there were also some occasions when knife wielders, generally supporting the independence of Xinjiang, that is the western part of China, where there's a significant Muslim population, and they feel that there is a significant layer of the people there who think they are subject to oppression because the Chinese population has begun to outnumber the indigenous people of Xinjiang. And so some of them, whipped up by a group called the World Uyghur Council, based in Germany, some of them, and backed by the Americans and the Germans, by the way, some of them have taken to sort of terroristic measures and carried out attacks in railway stations and elsewhere, wielding knives and just, you know, screaming Allahu Akbar and stabbing people. Now, at Speaker's Corner, which has become a focal point for arguments over the last few years, there were, between the sort of Tommy Robinson supporters, a number of Christian fundamentalist groups and Muslims. And these arguments became quite virulent, although, you know, Speaker's Corner, we've always had virulent arguments, we've always had conflictual arguments, but on occasion they were exacerbated and pushed to the limit. For example, by Hatun Tash. Now, Hatun Tash was attacked physically, punched or slapped a few times, and then stabbed in the head by a Muslim terrorist or Islamic fundamentalist. And I remember that day that Mohammed Hijab and Ali Dawa, who are probably the most prominent Muslims at Speaker's Corner, immediately declared that to be a monstrous terrorist attack against her, even though she had been coming to Speaker's Corner sort of challenging the Muslim limits by wearing this Charlie Hebdo thing and so on, which provoked, you know, killings in France. So no, I don't have a problem with her going there with the Charlie Hebdo T-shirt, but you're aware in what circumstances, you know, it's like, you know, do you sing a happy song at a funeral? You don't. And when you do that, some people will get wound up and attack and this sort of thing. So provocation, it's a question of wisdom, isn't it? When do you do something? Now, as I said, I will defend her right to do that, but I don't think it was wise to do it. I've told her so myself, and she's got her reasons. She's a Christian convert. She hates Islam. She's welcome to do that, in my opinion. But I just think it's better to take it a bit more civilly and engage in the arguments rather than provoke. Now, I've done my fair share of provocation in the past, so I can understand where people come from. I used to go to Speaker's Corner and attack God, Queen and Country. I used to do in the 1990s. I used to be part of what was called the Atheist Propaganda Group and used to speak in favour of atheism. And I would wander straight into the Muslims and the Christians, and I would criticise religion in general, God, the existence of God and all that sort of thing. I learned after a while that was just a negative way of working, but everyone learns and everyone experiences things, and because of that they approach, they come to things from a different angle. So I don't, as I said, I didn't condemn Hatun for doing what she was doing, but I did expect there would be some violent attacks, and there were. Now, my first run-in with Tommy Robinson was at Speaker's Corner, and it was when Martin Sellner from the group called the Identitarians from Austria tried to come to England and was banned from coming to England. And he was going to make a speech at Speaker's Corner. And instead of him making the speech, Tommy Robinson came to Speaker's Corner and made the speech instead. And when he came, there was a gang of about 100 people with him. And I stood up, and Tommy Robinson, you can check this online, Tommy Robinson, a few days before that, had gone to Speaker's Corner on his own with a couple of people with a camera. And he said on there, "This is about free speech. I'm inviting communists, Marxists, leftists, right-wing, Christian, Muslim, anyone who's defense of free speech," I'm paraphrasing, but he did say Marxists and communists, to come to Speaker's Corner and defend free speech. So I thought, okay, I will. And I went there and I stood up and I made a speech, and I was attacked. I was physically attacked. I wasn't badly beaten. There were a lot of police around, but I was attacked. And there's video of that online, and Tommy did see it. And he didn't, on Russia Today, a few days later, he denied that anyone had touched me. Well, maybe he didn't quite see, but it was quite clear I was being shaken and pulled off the platform and dragged down. And some of the supporters of Tommy Robinson came up to me and said that was out of order. You had your right to speak. And so that was my first direct encounter. Now, I saw, for example, I was reasonably impressed by a video that Tommy Robinson did explaining the whole background to the sort of secret services harassing him and all the rest of it. And I could well understand that he would get enraged by that. I could also understand that he'd get enraged by people in, for example, in Luton, who are Muslim fundamentalists who he knew, for example, from school or whatever, standing on the street and promoting those type of ideas. And we've had a fair number of those type of people come to Speaker's Corner over the years. For example, I've been told, again, I can't, I want to be a bit precise about it, but there were many people who I know at Speaker's Corner who said that some of the 7-7 people used to come to Speaker's Corner, hang out there. And occasionally the police would arrange to have a discussion with myself or with some other people from Speaker's Corner. There was even a liaison group established under one of the police officers at Speaker's Corner who tried to alleviate the tensions, and he asked to meet up with me on a few occasions, and then a sort of liaison group was established where different people from different views at Speaker's Corner gathered together, and we would discuss with Steve Barnes, the police officer who was responsible at the time, about how to deal with the threats which I believed at the time. And I said to Steve Barnes when I first met him, this was several years ago, that there is a genuine threat from Islamic terrorists at Speaker's Corner, and there is a genuine threat from fascistic layers who might come with a machine gun. Remember Breivik, remember that guy in Norway who got a weapon and started. I think it was 70 people he killed. And there are such people, the Unabomber, another one, assume it's not an inside job, as some people have sort of implied about various people. I don't know. I'm not going to go into great detail about the inside jobs because I don't know, but there certainly are inside jobs here and there. And then some people, like the last few days, they were saying, it's always Muslim terrorism or black people murdering people or something of that nature. And then I thought about, well, Tommy Robinson's Irish. He's got an Irish passport. He's Irish background, put it that way. He's Irish background. He's born in Luton, but Irish background. And that's why he's got the Irish passport. And, I remember when I was a kid, the Irish were considered to be dangerous. And the main racist jokes were about the Irish. When I was a kid, I'm 60. When I was a kid, that was what it was. I remember hearing bombs go off when I'd come to London. There'd be like areas cordoned off. There was a bomb in Wimbledon. I remember when that went off. I heard the bomb in the morning. One of the MPs, I think it was blown up there. And the Irish were considered a danger. And the Irish had a different community. And the Irish was a religious dispute, by the way. And the British were supporting the Protestant faction, who were terrorist organisations. They also had terrorist organisations against the IRA and against the other Irish groups. So where does this all come from? Well, it's all of these things are have a long-standing historical background. Why is it that so many people from the Indian subcontinent come to Britain? And most of them have got family members here who came here after the Second World War. And they came here after the Second World War because Britain colonised India. And they had a layer of people in India who were interlinked with the British establishment. They established a government in India that was similar in terms of its legal structure and organisational structure to the British. That was the idea, to create in colonial and post-colonial systems. You would have, copies of the British system. And there were millions of Brits who went abroad and participated in the administration of those countries. Now, that doesn't mean that every Brit who went abroad was a monster who carried out barbarity against the people. But they did, for example, segregate the populations. So, for example, my father's from Malaysia. So in Malaysia, the Malays, the Chinese, and the Indians were segregated by the British. And the British were the superior, they were the rulers. And then the different populations would be segregated. And to some degree, you've got that in Britain today. It's not a physical segregation, but it's as if there is a physical segregation, because the communities will feel safe amongst their own. And so you'll have, for example, I was in Blackburn a few weeks ago, just after the election, where Craig Murray stood and another guy called Adnan stood, who actually won as an independent, backed mainly by the mosques and some of the community there, against the Labour Party, and that was about Gaza, And I was surprised at the degree of segregation in the area. One area is almost entirely sort of Indian subcontinent, mainly Pakistani and mainly Muslim, and the other area is mainly white. You drive 5 minutes in a different direction, it's mainly white. And so you do have a sort of semi-apartheid type division within the communities, and with different economies as well taking place, different cultures, different economies. There will be people there who don't even speak English in those communities. And so those people who are left behind will inevitably have a sense that they're being shat on, being neglected, being ignored. And of course that reflected itself in the Brexit vote. It reflected itself in I forgot my train of thought. Anyway, it reflected itself in the Brexit vote and in the election of the Tories in general. The so-called red wall that the Tories gained from Labour in the previous elections under Boris Johnson and so on. Now, where does this all come from? How does it sort of connect in? Well, it was wrong, and when you make a mistake, and God knows I've made enough mistakes in the past. When you make a mistake, for COVID, for example, at the beginning, I thought, COVID was a genuine, serious, viral threat to the world, and I called for a 3-week shutdown, and I severely regret having ever done that. But I admitted when I learned what was wrong about what I'd done, I tried to overcompensate in the opposite direction, or I tried to compensate in the opposite direction. I made a lot of effort to campaign against the lockdowns and restrictions and all the rest of it. And Tommy Robinson, unfortunately, doesn't do that very often, because I saw his posts over the last week or so, and at the beginning it was all like, Muslim and Islam is responsible for this. It wasn't. And there were people circulating this. Again, I understand why in the moment on TikTok or Twitter or whatever people want to circulate this stuff. But we see what the consequences are now. You can have nutcases who kill people, and you can have nutcases who murder children. And yes, they can be deranged. Now, what deranged them? Well, we don't know in this particular case of this Welsh-born Rwandan family, Alex guy. But certainly there were many people who became deranged, and the mental illness rose dramatically amongst the young people when the lockdowns happened. Massive rise in mental illness amongst young people. Massive. And if there's a massive rise in mental illness amongst young people, that means there will be a layer of people whose mental derangement will push them towards psychotic behaviour, like murdering completely innocent little children. And sadly, that's the world we live in. It happens more often in the United States, where you get these, mass shootings. A kid goes to school, is pissed off. Quite often, by the way, a reclusive child, not necessarily into any specific ideology, will, go out. You remember the Bob Geldof song, I don't like Mondays. What was it about? A kid who went on and shot a load of people, and then said, he was asked why he did it. He said, I don't like Mondays. So these are phenomena. These are monstrous phenomena produced by the society we live in, but also produced by psychotic. But psychotic breakdowns are produced by society as well. They're not just individual phenomena. They're products of circumstances. Now, I spent this morning going through Tommy Robinson's videos on, this truth campaign about his legal case. And when I went through it, and I went through the counter arguments about it, it struck me that this argument about the truth case, what this Syrian kid did in terms of being a bully and all that sort of thing, it's perfectly possible that's true. And it seems to be from the interviews that are on there, it seems that he was some kind of bully, and that he hadn't adjusted well to the community, and he was some kind of bully, isn't it? Maybe the kid who attacked him had a perfectly legitimate ground for attacking him. But the libel case was about something different. And in terms of the libel case, I read the statement by the judge on the libel case, and Tommy lost. He lost because he made allegations that were wrong, just the same as he made an allegation a few days ago that was wrong about, or an association between Muslims and the events in the killing of the children, which led, by the way, to the riot attack in the mosque. Now, some people said that there was a Muslim guy, or Muslim-looking guy, or an Arab guy with a knife found nearby, and that's what provoked the attack on the mosque. I doubt that, but the assumption, which was promoted by Tommy and by a number of other people, that the killer of the children was a Muslim, and straight off the boats, that was wrong. And when you make a mistake like that, you need to say it. You need to say, that was wrong, I was wrong. I've got these complaints against the Muslim community or Islam or whatever, against rape gangs, but to say that specific thing was true and not retract it when the evidence is clear that you're wrong, it's just not cricket, you know what I mean? So now we got the same phenomena being blown out because it's been unleashed now. It's the boats. Now, there are legitimate complaints about the boats. I'm not disputing that in the least. It's not the largest proportion of migrants, nor the largest proportion of illegal migrants, by the way. Most illegal migrants or refugees will come on a plane or on a normal boat or on a train, and they'll have a visa that allows them to come to England, and then they just stay. I used to know lots of people from Brazil who overstayed. I knew people from different countries around the world who overstayed. You just got to get here by plane, haven't you? How many planes are landing every day? And because Britain doesn't have such a tight system of registration and control as perhaps Germany does, or France does, probably that's one of the reasons people don't stay. A lot of these people don't stay in France. It's not just the language, but it's also because the people who gather in Calais and try and get across on boats and all that sort of thing. It's because the registration systems in France and Germany are tighter. And I'm not. That doesn't mean I'm in favour of tightening registration. I'm not, because that's one of the advantages in Britain for all of us not to be monitored and controlled all the time. Now, Tommy Robinson has received support, as a lot of you will probably know, historically, from the Zionist lobby. And if you look back on Subject Access, in fact, on the main page of Subject Access, there's a video of me speaking at a Palestine rally in November last year. And there I warned that the main danger that is happening now is the division of society based on religion or based on ethnicity or race. And I said, well, we need to make sure that we take the community out, the Christians to the Muslims to the Christians, amongst the working classes, the white working class, the black working class, the Asian working class, get them together. You have differences, enormous differences between these communities, but you also have enormous similarities. I used to work in a bus garage in London, in what was Victoria Garage, back in the day, the 1980s, 1987, 88. And there was a segregated garage. We had like the Jamaicans would meet in one corner, the Irish a little bit in another, the Indians in another. It wasn't completely like that, but it was a lot like that. But we were still workers who worked together, got along with each other, almost completely. We would ally ourselves together. People, they had all sorts of clubs for people to join. It was an airplane club, fishing club, all that sort of thing. And so people got together and they worked together. There isn't a way of preventing these riots, of preventing this discontent, of unifying the people without approaching things in that direction. A grassroots campaign to unify the communities. And that does mean that in those communities, for example, like Blackburn, you have to have an interchange between the people, and there need to be campaigns from below to interconnect the people. Now, I saw there was one mosque in north of England where they were saying, well, when the demonstrators come, we're going to go out and give hamburgers and soft drinks and have a chat with them. And I saw quite an emotive image this morning on Twitter where there was an Islamic guy hugging one of the people who come on the demonstration. The truth is, once you get people sitting down, ordinary working class people sitting down with each other, hammering out what their arguments are, hammering out what the disputes are, they do find common ground. And there are it's a tiny minority of the Muslim community who are involved either in rape gangs, and that's generally not Muslim, it just happens to be from a specific grouping within the Muslim community who are criminals. And it's not Muslims in general. And this is a problem, like Lawrence Fox's post, for example. Now's the time to eradicate all Islam from Britain, all Muslims from Britain. Oh, what on earth is that? What sort of comment is that? Jumped up actor coming out with stuff like that can only inflame tension and poison atmosphere between people. And so if you make a mistake like that, again, someone could come out with some comment. When I was a kid, racist comments were standard at school. Everyone came, including me. Everyone came out with them. I'm not opposed. I'm not someone who says you can't say this, you can't say that. I prefer it's out in the open because then people, you can deal with it. People used to give it back. They got it, they gave it back in those days. And it's true nowadays. It's been, cut out the language, delete the language, and like Orwellian speak, you don't say this anymore, you can't say that anymore. And the consequence of that is we end up with particularly amongst the white working class, you get up with a mood where they say, well, I can't say what I actually think. So it's all suppressed, and then it will blow up when circumstances like this occur. Now, coming back to Speaker's Corner, so then what happened was, when the second lockdown came, this was November 2020, I was at Speaker's Corner, and we had been getting messages from the police, basically, that we're about to close down Speaker's Corner. And there was something called the Rule of Six at the time. And I went round to, you can see on the video from Content Over Everything, I went round Speaker's Corner speaking to the different people who at Speaker's Corner, the different speakers, all the different speakers, Christian, Muslim, atheist, all of them. I spoke to Martin Besserman, to Danny Shine. I said to them, look, they got this thing called Rule of Six. Why don't we just say, look, okay, we know there's supposed Rule of Six. So we tell people you're not supposed to be here above 6. But if you're standing there and you're distanced or whatever, it's not our fault. We haven't congregated you there to break the law. And so in that way, we could continue with speakers. And most people say, yeah, we agree with that. And then Hattoon had some kind of altercation the week before. And suddenly there was about 50 or 100 police officers marching in to Speaker's Corner. And I looked over, what on earth is going on there? And in the middle was Tommy Robinson. And this was the first weekend, the first Sunday of November in 2020. And the new restrictions on protests in Hyde Park, in Britain, the new restrictions were coming in, not on protests, new restrictions, lockdown restrictions, were coming on the 5th of November. In fact, I think the details of it were announced on the 4th. But in any case, you can check that back yourselves. And Tommy Robinson came into the park and the police marched him in. And I thought, well, why are the police marching Tommy Robinson into Hyde Park? Particularly given the fact that on the previous occasion, there was a riot afterwards. I was arrested first. So the previous occasion was a few years before. I was arrested. Sorry, no, I've got it all mixed up. I'm really sorry. Let me come back to the 2020. The beginning of November, I was arrested for standing up, and I spoke Tommy Robinson was about 20 yards away from me, or 10 yards away from me, and we're talking to Hattoon, and I spoke to him, and I spoke towards him, and I said, well, why did you lie on the previous occasion on RT saying you didn't see people attacking me, because they did attack me? And then one of Tommy Robinson's supporters attacked me then. Actually, I get along with the guy now. We've shaken hands, we made up. I'm all right with him, and he's all right with me, because we both got involved in the anti-lockdown movement. We forgive and forget. But then the police came and arrested me. And they dragged me to the floor, took me to the police station in Wandsworth Town. And when I got to Wandsworth Town, they took a long time to get me there. And when I got to Wandsworth Town, Tommy Robinson was there as well. He'd also been arrested some 20 minutes later. And we were standing opposite each other in the police station when we were both getting booked. Although they released me. They released him later, but they released me then. And I wondered, well, why did the police escort Tommy Robinson into the park a few days before the lockdown restrictions? And it was then, sorry, just to clarify, it was then when Tommy Robinson was arrested that there was some rioting, or some fights took place between some of the Muslims, particularly up the Edgware Road area, and some of them at Speaker's Corner, and Tommy Robinson's supporters. So this was in November, the first weekend of November 2020. And the video of Tommy's arrest is on Subject Access here, on the archives, 2020 November. And the video of my arrest is on. Well, you'll find some of the channels that have covered it as well. I can't remember, Jordan, someone or other covered it. A number of other people covered it as well. Now, I'm not saying, although I thought at the time, I'm not saying that Tommy Robinson was orchestrating that. But sometimes, some people are above, know how to orchestrate something to make it look like a certain series of events are connected together and pulled together. So it could be that Tommy was used in order to promote the idea of, Britain is too violent and Speaker's Corner is too violent. And Speaker's Corner was closed down for months and months and months. Thereafter, whenever we went to Speaker's Corner, police were trying to arrest us, just for trying to enter the park. And you can see the videos of all that, well-recorded GB resistance, subject access, lots and lots and lots of videos all over the place. Us trying to enter the park under the lockdown restrictions, being arrested or threatened immediately. And people being arrested for having a cup of tea, for standing in the park, for going into the park, one thing after another, one arrest after another, and brutal arrests, some of them. Young girls being arrested, old men being harassed or arrested. There's a mass of these things. So then, someone's going to go at me. Don't ever go at Tommy Robinson and sort of thing. Well, you have to ask yourself what's going on. Who's doing what? What are the divisions in society? How are they fostered? How do you undermine that? How do you weaken those divisions? How do you unify people? And to be honest with you, I can't see. Someone just put this. I just saw this. Someone just put this, and it's interesting what he's saying there. And that's like partition England, he says. So partition England, this is exactly the type of direction in which we're going, you see. And a lot of these things tie in with the establishment's interests. All this WEF stuff and all this. And it's not that I'm saying the WEF control everything. I don't like Piers, unlike Piers Corbyn and some other people, think the WEF is some kind of omnipotent power with a unified program able to impose itself universally at will. I don't think that's the case. But it is a power, and it does have agendas, and those agendas sometimes are being pushed through, as far as they can go, whenever they can go. One of the consequences of the Southport protest the other day was Keir Starmer's, immediately bringing in facial recognition. Well, it was an action waiting for an excuse. Now, I'm not saying you can't. Yes, divide and conquer. I'm not saying you can't introduce those things without that excuse, but it's a very, convenient excuse, and it's going to get worse. And of course, Keir Starmer, he knows it. He's playing a game now where he, because everyone knew he was a twat. Everyone knew he can't string a sentence together. He can't talk to people. But he does know how to talk to the officialdom in the police because he was head of the CPS. That's the bureaucratic administrative state, the bureaucratic administrative security services. That's what he knows, and that's what he represents. Now, it's against this type of tyrannical power that they're imposing that we need to work on. And one of the themes that Tommy Robinson talks about in his video, the more recent video, the one that's got millions and millions of views, is, you need to talk the truth. We need to tell the truth. I don't think the story about the Syrian kid really reveals the truth because the idea that the state institutions, that the mass media, that the establishment are coming for him and this is some new change in British society, it's not. British society has been structured as a dictatorial power for hundreds of years. And certainly in the last 20 years, and certainly in the last 4 years since the lockdowns, the tyranny has become obvious to anyone who was looking. So the idea that, something new has happened and the British establishment have suddenly become corrupt and the British media have suddenly become liars and the British judicial system is suddenly, serving only the wealthy and powerful. Well, there's nothing new about that at all. And everything during the lockdowns and everything during the whole history of Britain's riddled with that. That's what the courts are. The courts are instruments for oppression on the part of the establishment, on the part of the ruling classes. and they turn one against another. That's what it is. Some people come out, divide and rule, divide and rule. They're 100% right. It goes right back to Roman times and Greek times. And again, I ask you to look at the comments I made about the Palestine thing. Israel lobby supports Tommy Robinson. It's sad, but it's true. They support him, and some of the Zionists, there's a guy called Shillman, gives money through rebel media to promote their group. So, we're living in dark times, and these times we need to find the means, and it's the most difficult thing to do. It's like when the Ukrainians and the Russians are going to be prepared for peace. They have to stand one to another, face to face. People who've had their friends and family killed by the other side, and they have to hug each other and shake hands and say, "We are allies. Someone's been fucking us up." And so it is with the scenario we've got in Britain today. You've got to find the means for Christians to get together with Muslims. And Speaker's Corner is a good ambient to do this. Unfortunately, I won't be there till next weekend, but Speaker's Corner is a good ambient as an example to do that. Rather than hysterically attack the Muslims or hysterically attack the Christians, find the grounds to make the common discussion and debate about how we're to move forward as a society. And it's not going to be easy, and it's not exclusive to Britain. This is the point. You see, people talk about our nation is causing, or our nation is being eradicated. Our indigenous people are being eradicated. Well, but it's happening everywhere. That's the point. It's everywhere in Europe, for example. This same process is happening. The same dispute is taking place in the United States of America. What causes it? Why is it happening everywhere? It's not only, even in China or in India or in Indonesia, in those countries, it reflects where it's indigenous. You've got people from different parts of the country coming to the cities. Why? Because there's an economic pull, and there's a social, economic, and military push. So when people are in desperate conditions, well, then sections of them will try and fuck off and go to another country where the grass is greener, and some of them will be criminals, because criminal gangs, that many of them, to get out of the country, are paying criminal gangs. Many of them are involved in criminal gangs back home. What else are you supposed to do in the poorest parts of Afghanistan? Under the Americans, Afghanistan became, the number one producer of heroin, I think it was. And, of course, big money comes out of that trade. And then the Kosovo War, the Kosovans were the conduit. When we supported the Kosovo Liberation Front, the Kosovo Liberation Army, they became the main transmitters of heroin to Europe. When we, there are people, when we support the Ukrainian army, they're involved in large-scale sections of the Ukrainian mafia are involved in large-scale prostitution of the Ukrainian women across the whole of Europe and the whole world, actually. And mafia gangs have seized control of Ukraine with our money, by the way. And the living standards that have collapsed, that have caused a lot of the tensions in British society, well, that came, one, from COVID, and two, from the Ukraine war. And that's what they say themselves. Why are we paying more money for everything? Because the Ukraine war is where we're sending our money, financing the war. And so it's those above are causing this. It's not your neighbour who's Muslim. It's not even the boat people, although I understand why people are upset about it. But it's not them causing it. They are products of it. And if you like, elements of this whole international capitalist game to plunder the world for their own interests. And it's indicative that the ruling classes and Nigel Farage and some of the people claiming to be English nationalists and saying that the English flag is not allowed when the Palestinian flag is, and yet they'll carry the Israel flag. And the Israelis are slaughtering children by the tens of thousands every day. And it's when a section of the disgruntled Islamic fundamentalist layers look on at that and see the utter indifference or even the support by the British establishment, sending weapons, supporting them, giving finance, backing them to the hill, and calling people protesting in London against that barbarity, tens of thousands of kids, not 3 kids, tens of thousands of kids, then a layer of the deranged and angry Islamic fundamentalists will pull out their knives and start killing our kids. So we need to have clarity in understanding the historical background and understanding how we overcome those contradictions between people today. And it's as simple as, if the ruling classes are those responsible, then it is the working classes who must unite from below. Now that's, I know that's Karl Marx, and a lot of people might not like the idea of that, but that's all he's saying. He's saying that the oppressed people of the world must unify together against the rulers. Who are they today? Big tech, big pharma, and the military. They're controlling the world, and the mass media are stooges of them. And a few billionaires control the mass media. A few billionaires control the internet sphere that we communicate through, including the mechanism that we're communicating through now. They said what we can say and what we couldn't say. They determine the algorithm as to who can see and who can't see. They determine who becomes a big star on YouTube and who doesn't. It's all determined by algorithms and by decisions by those above, working in conjunction with the intelligence agencies to control the truth, the so-called truth. And so beware of false friends is what I would say. Beware of false friends. What your instinct is. I know there's always an instinct. Turn against the one who might be there. But the second instinct, take a step back, have a think. Are they really your enemy, or are you being manipulated? Is this really your friend, or are they manipulating you? And in that way, we can take some steps. But we are in dark times, we are in dark times. There's no doubt about it. But as I said, what appears to be a national problem is actually an international problem. What appears to be a racial problem or a religious problem is actually a class problem. And we need to rebuild the power of working people to recognize their commonality. And that can start at a very grassroots level. You just go and talk to them. Talk to the neighbors, talk to the friends, go down. Yes, if you're Christian or you're go down to the mosque and see what they're like there. Just go in, take your shoes off, go in, say hello, say you'd like to find out something. It doesn't make you a Muslim, but it makes you understand them a bit more and them understand you a bit more, and then invite them the other way around. Now, if they don't come, of course you can turn around and say, well, they didn't come. And that's true. They'll find others who will. And in that way you find some bond, some commonality, some means to overcome this shit that's been thrown at us by these people from above. And they were killing. Terrible that these kids were murdered. But how many kids were killed? In the last few years. Remember Ramis, who I consider a great revolutionary for the young people. He went out. He put out his video. Don't take the vaccine. He went to the kids, straight to the kids in the schools. Stood outside the school gates, and he got kids walking out like the Pied Piper, marching behind him, refusing to take the jabs. And God knows, he saved many lives by that type of activity. So it's the same type of approach we need to take. This from below. What can you do to stop this? I remember there was a in the year 2010 there was a student protest in London, and I went to the protest. You can find online there somewhere. You'll find the videos. I went to the protest. The police, they were in Whitehall, in front of Downing Street, and there was about 10,000 students there, and the police just withdrew and left a van in the middle. And then some of the young kids jumped on the van, started smashing things up and all the rest of it. And I ran around that van talking to the kids, and I said, look, this is a setup. They want the news to be you're smashing this van up, and some of the kids, some school kids actually gathered round, and you can find the video, you can find the images online of these school kids holding hands around the van to protect it. They didn't manage to do it in the end, but the optics were good. The optics presented us in a different way, you know. And so those of you who feel motivated to go on these demonstrations and so on and don't want to engage in violence, so show that. Standing just as we did in the anti-lockdown movement. Remember when in April 2021, the police attacked us at Speaker's Corner, and we drove them out of the park. But once we were driving them out of the park and they were running away, significant numbers of the burly lads linked arms, even those who had previously been ferociously against the police, linked arms and protected the police. And it was the right thing to do. It was the right thing to do. And so some of those lads who are on the demonstrations now, who I understand what some of their grievances, some of them have legitimate grievances and are protesting on legitimate grounds, at least motivationally. I wouldn't join that, but motivationally. So when someone turns around to you and says, they fucking firebomb that mosque, no, go up, link your arms and appeal to the Muslims to join you in linking their arms. And in that way you create a solidarity from below to understand. So far and no further. We will not be divided by the ruling classes turning us one against another in their own interests. And anybody who's seeking to do that is a traitor to the people. Anyway, I've said enough. I wanted to say something. I've said enough. I hope you've found something useful in this. And good luck. And I'll see you back in London next week.